Hello, mathematicians. Today we're going to be learning about fractions and decimals, more specifically about number lines counting by sixths. To get us started, here we have a number line. And notice that in between 0 and 1, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces. In between 1 and 2, we also have 6 spaces. And in between 2 and 3, we also have 6 spaces. That means that it takes 6 out of 6 spaces to make a whole. So, because we need 6 spaces to make a whole, that means we're going to count up by sixths. So we have 1 out of 6, we have 2 sixths, we have 3 sixths, we have 4 sixths, and we have 5 sixths. Then we have 6 out of 6, which is equivalent to 1 whole because it takes 6 out of 6 spaces to make 1 whole. After 6 over 6, we're going to continue the pattern and we get 7 out of 6, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 1 and 1 over 6. Then we have 8 over 6, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 1 and 2 out of 6. Then we have 9 out of 6, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 1 and 3 out of 6. Then we have 10 out of 6, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 1 and 4 out of 6. Then we have 11 out of 6, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 1 and 5 over 6. Then we have 12 out of 6, which can be simplified to 2. Then we have 13 out of 6, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 2 and 1/6. Then we have 14 out of 6, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 2 and 2 out of 6. Then we have 15 over 6, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 2 and 3 out of 6. Then we have 16 out of 6, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 2 and 4 out of 6. Then we have 17 out of 6, again an improper fraction that can be written as 2 and 5 over 6. And then we have 18 over 6, which can be simplified to 3. So we don't actually need our improper fractions because they can be written as a mixed number or a whole number, so we could leave our number line just like this. So here we have a vertical number line. And notice that in between 0 and 1, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces. So we're counting up by sixths. So we have 1 out of 6, 2 out of 6, 3 out of 6, 4 out of 6, 5 out of 6. Then we have 1, and then 1 and 1 out of 6, 1 and 2 out of 6, 1 and 3 out of 6, 1 and 4 out of 6, 1 and 5 out of 6, and then 2. So now we're going to go back to our horizontal number line and take our fractions and convert them to decimals. We're going to start off with 1 over 6. In order to convert this to a decimal, we have to divide the numerator divided by the denominator. So that means 1 divided by 6, where 1 is our dividend and 6 is our divisor. So we ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 1? Well, it doesn't, so we're going to put a 0 right above that. And then in order to continue dividing, we have to add a decimal point after the 1 and a 0. Make sure you bring up the decimal point. And then we're going to ignore the decimal point for this and ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 10? Well, 6 goes into 10 one time, and that's because 6 times 1 is equal to 6. And that's as close as we could get without going over 10. So we're going to place the 6 here, and then we're going to subtract. 10 minus 6 is equal to 4. Because we have a remainder, we're going to go ahead and add another 0. Make sure you bring that 0 down. Now we ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 40? Well, 6 goes into 40 6 times, and that's because 6 times 6 is equal to 36. We're going to go ahead and write the 36 there, and then subtract. 40 minus 36 is equal to 4. Because we have a remainder, we're going to go ahead and add another 0. Make sure you bring it down. Then we ask ourselves again, how many times does 6 go into 40? Well, 6 goes into 40 6 times because 6 times 6 is equal to 36. So we're going to go ahead and write that down and then subtract. 40 minus 36 is equal to 4. And notice here that we keep getting the same remainder because this decimal is going to keep repeating. So we're going to keep adding 6's afterwards. So we could write this as 0.16. Notice that we have a line above the 6 because this shows that the 6 is going to keep repeating, not the 1. All right? So this is our decimal equivalent to 1 over 6. So we're going to go ahead and put it on our number line right above 1 over 6. Now, let's take 2 over 6 and convert that to a decimal. So in order to convert this fraction to a decimal, we have to go ahead and divide our numerator divided by our denominator. So that means we're going to take 2 and divide by 6, where 2 is going to be our dividend and 6 is going to be our divisor. We ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 2? Well, it doesn't, so we're going to put a 0 right above it. After the 2, we're going to add a decimal point if we want to keep dividing. And that is 0. Make sure you bring up the decimal point. And now we're going to ignore the decimal point for this next step where we ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 20? Well, 6 goes into 20 3 times, and that's because 6 times 3 is equal to 18. So we're going to go ahead and put the 18 right under the 20, and then we're going to subtract. So 20 minus 18 is equal to 2. Because we have a remainder, we're going to go ahead and add a 0. Make sure you bring that down, and then we ask ourselves again, how many times does 6 go into 20? Well, 6 goes into 20 3 times, and that's because 6 times 3 is equal to 18. We're going to go ahead and write it and then subtract. 20 minus 18 is equal to 2, and then we add another 0. Notice that the same thing keeps happening. Once we add another 0, we get 20 again. And we know that 6 goes into 20 3 times because 6 times 3 is equal to 18. And then if we do 20 minus 18, we're going to get a remainder of 2 again. So this is a repeating decimal. And in this case, the 3 keeps repeating. So we're going to write that as 0.3 with a line over the 3 to show that it's going to keep repeating. And then over 2 over 6, we're going to go ahead and write the decimal equivalent. So let's go ahead and find the decimal equivalent to 3 over 6. So in order to find the decimal equivalent to 3 over 6, we have to do the same thing where we take our numerator and divide it by our denominator. So that means that 3 is going to be our dividend and 6 is going to be our divisor. So we ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 3? Well, it doesn't, so we're going to add a 0 and then add a decimal point after the 3 and add a 0 so we could keep dividing. Make sure that you bring up that decimal point, and then we ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 30? Well, 6 goes into 30 5 times, and that's because 6 times 5 is equal to 30. So we're going to write the 30 below and then subtract. 30 minus 30 is equal to 0, so we don't have a remainder, and 3 over 6 is equivalent to 5/10. So above 3 over 6 on our number line, we're going to go ahead and write 5/10. So now let's take 4 over 6 and find the decimal equivalent. And in this case, we're going to divide the numerator divided by the denominator like we did with the other fractions. And that means that 4 is going to be your dividend and 6 is going to be your divisor. We ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 4? Well, 6 does not go into 4, so that's going to be 0. And so after the 4, we're going to add a decimal point and a 0 so that we can keep dividing. Make sure that you bring up the decimal point. Then we ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 40? Well, 6 goes into 40 6 times, and that's because 6 times 6 is equal to 36. So 40 minus 36 now is equal to 4. Because we have a remainder, we're going to go ahead and add another 0. Once we bring it down, we get 40 again. So 6 goes into 40 6 times because we know that 6 times 6 is equal to 36. And then when we subtract, we're going to get 4 again. So if we add another 0 and bring it down, then we have 40 again. And we ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 40? Well, we know that's 6 because 6 times 6 is equal to 36. And then we go ahead and subtract. So 40 minus 36 is equal to 4. And notice that here we have another repeating decimal where the 6 keeps repeating. So we're going to rewrite that as 0.6 with a line above the 6 to show that the 6 is going to keep repeating. So above 4 over 6, we're going to go ahead and write this decimal equivalent. All right, so here, now we have 5 over 6, and in order to find the decimal equivalent, we're going to go ahead and divide the numerator divided by the denominator. So we're going to take 5 divided by 6, where 5 is our dividend and 6 is our divisor. We ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 5? Well, it doesn't, so we're going to put a 0 here, and then add a decimal point after the 5, and add a 0 if we want to keep dividing. Make sure that you bring up that decimal point, and then we ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 50? Well, 6 goes into 50 8 times because 6 times 8 is equal to 48. And that's as close as we could get without going over 50. So 50 minus 48 is equal to 2. So we're going to go ahead and add another 0 so we could keep dividing. So then we ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 20? Well, 6 goes into 20 3 times because 6 times 3 is equal to 18. We're going to put the 18 right below the 20 and then go ahead and subtract. 20 minus 18 is equal to 2. So we're going to add another 0 and bring it down. Then we ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 20? Well, again, 6 goes into 20 3 times because 6 times 3 is equal to 18. We go ahead and rewrite the 18 underneath the 20. And when we subtract, we're going to get 2 again. So notice that this decimal will continue with this pattern, where we have 0.83 and the 3 keeps repeating, not the 8. So we're going to write the decimal equivalent over 5 over 6. All right? So here we have a pattern where we're increasing by 1 over 6. So we're actually adding 0.16 with the 6 repeating over and over again. And then if we add 1 more, we get 1. And then, so 1 and 1/6 is going to be the same as 1/6, except we have a whole number that is 1. So notice that these decimals are the same, except this time they have a whole number of 1. So there's a pattern here. Then we get to 2. And then when we have 2 and 1/6, the decimal is the same as 1/6, except this time our whole number starts with 2. So the same thing happens for each one of these because we have a whole number of 2. But the fractions are the same. So here in our final slide, we have a vertical number line that is increasing by 6. So we're going to go ahead and write the decimal equivalent that we got in the previous slide, but on a vertical number line instead this time. All right, so if we write the decimal equivalents here, only difference is this line is vertical. And that's it for number lines counting by 6.